This is my final snapshot reflection, and it's kind of crazy to think that I just need to do this and then I'm all done with CSL 300. The goal of this snapshot is to reflect on what I really got out of the course, like the big lessons and achievements. So I have two objectives that really stand out for me. I've kind of narrowed it down from everything that we discussed in all of the class discussions and all of my essays and all of the reflection that I did during my placement. I've narrowed it down to a couple of things that I just want to point out because they're kind of related to each other. The first objective that I feel I achieved is a pretty obvious one, I guess. It's the deliverable that my group created for the Accessibility Advisory Committee of the City of Edmonton. We were asked to put together a manual for creating accessible events for event planners to use in the future to make their events as accessible as possible to people living with all different kinds of disabilities. Did I expect for this objective to be achieved at the beginning of the term? Yes. Did my idea of how it would be achieved change throughout the term? Also, yes. I feel like it absolutely did. It seemed like every time we had a group meeting, we changed our approach or we changed the layout of the document and how we wanted to go about it. In the end, we did come up with a manual, a long document of around 30 or 40 pages to present to the City of Edmonton, which we felt encompassed as best as possible all of the information that we had researched. It wasn't exactly what we envisioned. It was missing some sections, some chunks of information that had been overlooked in our group meetings. I mean, 120 hours between 4 people only goes so far. So what we did was we created a document and we handed it over to the City of Edmonton to alter as they see fit. They may want to add sections, they may want to remove sections, but as far as the objective being achieved, we've definitely got a solid start on a manual that can be designed, produced, and distributed to event planners in the City of Edmonton. I was discussing with some of my group members at one of our meetings about where our project falls on Morton's continuum of charity, project, and social change. What we ended up agreeing on was the actual manual we were creating, this deliverable, which I say was an objective we achieved, is itself a project because it's not quite done yet. It's ongoing. It's going to be built upon. The city might even end up putting some other CSL students on it to add to or finish what we started. It's then going to be produced and distributed to event planners within the Edmonton community to make events as accessible as possible in the future. And however, we all seem to agree that the work that we were doing as CSL students of doing the research, typing up the document, and putting the whole project together to get it started is charity work. And the reason for that is because we've kind of done our hours and now we're heading off. It's not going to be us that finish and publish the document and make sure that it's distributed to event planners. So for that reason, our time and our work was charity. I feel the social change element is also addressed with this placement because the Accessibility Advisory Committee is a great place for members of the disability community in Edmonton to have their say on how Edmonton's policies are structured. I feel that I will use a lot of the tips that we researched and ended up putting in the document, and that's how I feel that this objective can be useful to me in the future. The second objective I feel I achieved was that I have increased my awareness and understanding of accessibility and of privilege. Since we've started all of this research, I've started to notice accessibility a lot more in my day-to-day life, and especially where it's lacking. For example, I'll walk up a ramp and think, this seems a little steep. I have to wonder if this ramp is accessible. Or after researching all of the details about what is actually required in a handicap stall in an event, I'll drive past a handicap stall at the store and think, I don't think that stall is as accessible as it could be. Additionally, I feel like I've learned a lot about the different ways that environments not being accessible can affect those living with disabilities, or even if the environment is technically accessible, they can still feel removed as they're experiencing things differently from us. For example, if I was at an event and the general population is following one route through the event to see different exhibits, to experience it, and there was a staircase that hadn't been made accessible, but instead an alternate accessible route was provided, that person now has to leave the general stream of traffic to experience the event in a completely different way from everyone else. There are a lot of different forms which this can take, but this is something that I've just started to notice a lot more in my day-to-day life, and I feel like that's a good objective to have achieved through doing all of this research in this project. It brings to mind the Means article about democratic and social justice goals, which talks about steering students in the direction of civic engagement. So what I want to say is, while this article did draw my attention to the different ways that CSL creates civically engaged citizens, I feel that this is a positive direction in this particular instance. Where before I might have considered that civically engaged citizens coming out of CSL programs would be people who are motivated to volunteer and be physically involved in their community, I feel that this is something that came out of CSL, but now I've also realized it can just take the form of being more aware of understanding a community about which I had little knowledge to begin with. I feel that I will use what I've achieved in this sense by being more accessible in my day-to-day life. One of the elements of accessibility that we studied and included in our document was language and working with people with cognitive disabilities, or just other disabilities outside of the three: mobility, visual disabilities, and auditory disabilities. For example, when you're speaking to a group of people, not knowing whether some of those people may have an invisible disability, it is wise to just generally avoid using things like idioms or unnecessarily long words, which, as I learned this semester, can be forms of being inaccessible to people with disabilities. In addition to that, I've learned to recognize accessibility and inaccessibility. So if I go on to be a policymaker, or I have a job where I'm in charge of planning an event, where I'm in charge of planning how an organization is going to be set up, I'll have more insight about ways to make that organization a space that is as accessible as possible to members of the broad disability community, as there are a lot of different forms that this can take. Having an actual concrete, substantial product that came out of my work with this placement, as well as noticing my own increased awareness and understanding of my own privilege in my community, are two objectives that I feel really will benefit me in the future, and two things that I'm happy to have achieved during this CSL course. Thanks!